more people active daily than China has people, than India has people, right? And so it's similar with sites like Google, like Amazon. um, TikTok is getting there. And so all of these platforms have become larger than most websites. There are 1 billion websites today, but there are very few services with over 1 billion users each. And the power that they wield is very scary. So what we've come to is the centralization of the internet, where these platforms effectively end up controlling our speech, controlling our experiences. Now, when we had a decentralized internet, you could be anonymous, you could post wherever you wanted, whatever you wanted. Today, advertising networks and Facebook and Google end up tracking everything that you do. They're building your profile. You have to abide by their terms and conditions, reasonable or unreasonable as they might be. Every day we see accounts being banned for something that Facebook might deem not in compliance with their terms and conditions. Accounts get banned on Twitter regularly. And so what you've got is that where you had a space for freedom, for vulnerability, for voicing your views, where you had diversity and plurality, you now have filter bubbles and control. And above all, you have electoral interference, where the destiny of countries can be manipulated by using the platforms because most people in a country are on these platforms. When we fought the battle for net neutrality in India, we were afraid of one single thing, that telecom operators and Facebook together would end up becoming the internet. Today, that's a reality in countries like Myanmar, in Philippines, and Nigeria. We've got the strongest net neutrality laws in India, and that's why we don't have that problem. But if you think about it, how does centralization impact countries? Earlier in this decade, if you remember, there was the Arab Spring. Facebook and Twitter went about town saying that they've got democracy to the Middle East. But if you're a country, how does that impact you? That Facebook and Twitter have the ability to manipulate your elections, of rabble-rousing and effectively getting people on the streets to riot? So you're going to be conscious of your security, of your sustainability as a country. So what does a country do to protect itself? And that's the change that we are seeing today in the internet that we have. Most countries, most large countries today are conscious of digital sovereignty. And we've heard that phrase many, many times in India over the last year. A couple of months ago, after a trip to India, Angela Merkel spoke about digital sovereignty for Germany. France has talked about it. China's got a closed internet. Russia's closing its internet. Iran's looking at doing the same thing. And so what we're seeing is that states are trying to protect themselves. Now, the playbook that we've seen play out in India in particular goes something like this. Because Facebook has 1 billion users and you have over 1 billion citizens, you start mapping everyone. You start behaving like a platform, like Facebook. So that's why you've got digital identity projects like Aadhaar. You're trying to digitize all government services so that you can map them to people. Even cars today have got a fast tag, which is mapped to an individual's account, which then creates a history of that user's behavior. You've got biometrics and facial recognition taking place everywhere, not just at airports, but even at protests, right? Today, in fact, now there's a case in the Supreme Court of India that's going to rule on whether social media profiles should be linked to identities. And so the state is trying to gain control through digitizing everything, but also controlling everything. They're monitoring, they're surveilling all our phone calls, which is, they want to break encryption because WhatsApp's end-to-end encryption means that they can't read our messages. In the same way, when Facebook was trying to convert all of its platforms into end-to-end encrypted platforms, countries wrote to them trying to get them to not do it. Another move that's happening is to bring liability to platforms like Facebook and Twitter and WhatsApp, so that these platforms are potentially liable for the content that you and I send on them. What this is going to do is lead to a chilling effect on our speech. We're going to be monitored all the time. So we won't be able to trust the communication that we're having with each other, that a third person isn't reading it. And so that at the center of it is what privacy is about. There's also an attempt to break these platforms down through competition regulation, saying that they're becoming far too powerful, and so therefore they probably need to be split into multiple companies. And there's a move to regulate content. Content on Netflix and Amazon Prime and Hotstar is very different from what you see on TV today. And that diversity and that plurality is what allows us to enjoy the content that we want in the privacy of our bedrooms. But there's a move to bring the same regulation that exists on TV, that exists in cinemas, to the internet. This is all about the state trying to replace platforms or trying to do what platforms do, but also take controls of how platforms behave. And this comes from the lack of trust in the internet. And this trust deficit exists not just between you and the platform that you use, you and the state that governs you, but not just between companies and the states, but also between countries. Last year, there was an attack, a cyber attack on an Indian nuclear power plant in Kudankulam. If you know about the NSO hack that happened on WhatsApp, an Israeli company was selling software that was used by governments to snoop on people. And so we can't trust governments anymore, but governments also can't trust each other. There are cyber weapons that are being created and used by countries against each other. If you look at the Snowden revelations, the US government was effectively gaining access to private messages of citizens of other countries. So countries don't trust other countries anymore, and they have to act not just to protect their citizens, but also their sovereignty. And this lack of trust is what is breaking the internet today. What you will have very soon is a Russian internet for Russia, a Chinese internet for China, which already exists, by the way, an Indian internet for Indians. Today in Kashmir, only about 301 websites are accessible, and those are websites which the state is allowing them to use. Imagine you being in that situation. There's an EU internet because different regulations apply to the EU. There's a Brazilian internet in the future that will apply only to citizens from Brazil, an Indonesian internet, a Canadian internet. So what we're seeing is the balkanization of the internet as we see it. And for all of us who've grown up with the global internet, is that the internet that we want? So what's the solution? How do we solve this global problem? We have a global problem, so we need a global solution. We need the United Nations to act. We can't go back to a decentralized internet anymore. That ship has sailed. You can't ask 1 billion people to leave a platform that they've voluntarily signed up for. You can't prevent the creation of new billion user platforms. But what you can do is put in norms for operation. So in a state versus state scenario, what you have to do is disable or make illegal the creation of cyber weapons that are used to attack other countries. You have to have law enforcement cooperation, because if someone in our country attacks another, their law enforcement agencies should be able to identify and prosecute the people, at least identify the people and their activities here. Today, when a crime happens, it takes a year for law enforcement agencies to get access to data. We need a no first use policy for cyber attacks, just like we have no first use policies for nuclear attacks. We need cyber disarmament.